Hi, everybody. I am going to be joined in a moment by John Nichols from The Nation. He is the author of the aptly and perfectly titled Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. I have to say, I really could not put it down. He took all the information one might want and put it all together. John, come on in from the backstage of our online green room. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. And if you find an author who doesn't like an interviewer saying they couldn't put the book down, I'd be interested to meet that person because.
Well, really, though, I have put many books down, and this one was a page turner. I really, as I was saying to you a little bit right before we started this interview, everyone that I know was trying to make their way through the pandemic with, is my own child going to school? Is my mother protected? Am I okay? Do I have to wipe off these groceries or not? What kind of mask? Are we allowed to do this? Can we go outside? Can I ride the bus? These questions, especially at the beginning, that it was very difficult to follow all the malfeasance that went on with these elites. And you have taken much of that and put it together in one book that I have to say was, enlightening, but also very entertaining in the way that you wrote it. So I really appreciate that. What made you want to put all this information together in a piece like this?
Well, it started back in, I guess, March, April of 2020 in the very early stages of the pandemic. We had some really jarring things happen in my home state of Wisconsin. Many states delayed voting in the presidential primaries, but the Wisconsin legislature and state Supreme Court refused to allow that. So people who wanted to vote had to essentially risk their lives to go cast ballots. And it seemed to me that even in that very early stage, we saw all of the talk about shared sacrifice and we're all in this together and the country is coming together. I saw that all falling apart. The reality was that wasn't true. The truth of the pandemic, it was quite clear early on, was going to be exactly like so much else that happens in this country throughout its history. And that is that the poor and the working class are told it's shared sacrifice time. You've got to go to work even though you may be risking your life. You've got to maybe see your job, shut down or be put at risk as regards keeping your home and things like that, because this is such a jarring reality and it can't be avoided. You just have to deal with it. And then at the same time, of course, the wealthy retreat to their, country homes and their waterfront villas and reap the benefits of the moment. And, Naomi Klein taught us this when she wrote about disaster capitalism and the shock doctrine. The reality that we must always look in moments of catastrophe at those who are seeking to advance themselves politically or to profit personally as a result. And so I decided very early on that I was going to keep a file. And I was doing all my reporting for The Nation and writing a lot about the presidential race and all these other things. But I would always ask people along the way, about aspects of it. And I'd pull down, different pieces of information. And it was pretty clear that there was a book here, but it was a different kind of book than just the story of the pandemic. That story has been told and will be told. And there are going to be many, many great books on that. What I wanted to write about was a unique aspect of this, and that is the impunity of the powerful, the way in which political and economic elites take advantage of us, even in the most difficult and challenging of times. And it was clear after, digging into it that there was more than enough material to fill a book. In fact, you could probably do a second edition.
Yeah, I noticed the title, Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers. Talk about the difference between those two.
Sure. I think that there are clear categories that you have to put different players into. And some really are criminal, right? I mean, just what they've done is flat out wrong. And maybe it doesn't reach into the zone of a specific prosecution, but it certainly is a crime. And you put Donald Trump in that category right off the bat. I mean, the guy lied to us. He openly lied about the severity of a pandemic. And then he bragged about lying to Bob Woodward. So, I mean, it's like, well, the evidence is there. It's not very complicated. And so you have someone like that. You have someone like Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation.
Oh, yes. That's exactly who I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, I say again and again, bus drivers and subway employees and, flight attendants and others begged Elaine Chao to issue a mask mandate. Very simple, basic step, a mask mandate for all public transportation. It would have saved lives. There's simply no question of that. But she refused to do so and came up with ever more absurd excuses for why she wouldn't do it. And so to me, that falls into the that's just a crime.
It's a crime.
On the other hand, then you have people often who get away with it at a much more frequent level, who made huge profits off this, who benefited from it immensely. And in that category, I would, of course, put the pharmaceutical companies, which are reaping profits at a rate that is almost unimaginable. Pfizer and Moderna and some of their partners are making $1,000 a second, $65,000 a minute, $93 million a day, every day off these vaccines.
That obscene profit does call into question whether people really feel like they can trust the vaccine. So I have a soft spot kind of in my heart for the fact that these people who don't trust the vaccines, they might have a good reason not to trust them besides being anti-science or whatever.
Well, in this case, I'm double vaccinated and I've got my booster. And if there's another booster to be had, I'm first in line. Right. I'm first in line to get it.
Sure, but you can see how distrust isn't just something to be said, oh, these right-wingers are totally crazy. They're anti-vaxxers or nuts. There's a good reason to
distrust pharmaceutical companies.
Exactly.
But I think that doesn't mean, I think this is a real subtlety here. You can be deeply distrustful and skeptical of the pharmaceutical companies and how they operate, and still believe very much in the vaccines and in the importance of getting vaccinated and the value that they play. And this is really
I felt lucky personally because my husband is a scientist, a biologist, and he could explain to me how the vaccines work. I don't understand.
They really do work.
They work, and they're scientifically based, and he could explain to his family who were hesitant, but not everyone has that, which seems a whole nother segment that we could do.
But this gets to the heart of the matter, Juliana, because the pharmaceutical companies, by their extreme profiteering, feed into skepticism, right? They lead people to say, well, they're just in it for the money, right? Now, the truth of the matter is that the pharmaceutical companies are doing the vaccines not because they love doing vaccines, right? They like much higher profit drugs. Vaccines historically have not been particularly high profit. But they were put in a situation by our government where the research was done for them, or immense amounts of the research was done for them. They got advanced contracts that guaranteed them huge amounts of money. So of course they did the vaccines, and they are reaping massive profits. But what you should understand is that the situation we're in is one where it is that sort of crony capitalist combination of government and the corporate sector. Instead of handling it in the public interest, it's done, with an idea of, we'll let the market solve this problem, and we'll have the market come in and reward those who deliver the vaccines. Well, that's absurd. The fact of the matter is that we have the capacity to produce vaccines quickly and affordably for everybody in America and people around the world. And that's what should be done. But unfortunately, the way it's been set up is the pharmaceutical companies make massive profits. They literally can't even count the amount of money they're making. They estimate their profits for the year, and it turns out to be dramatically more. And so they're making massive profits, and yet they are refusing to share the data. They're refusing to share the information with other countries and with people who are in need. And so it's the worst of all situations. It shouldn't have been set up this way. It's a mess. And again, I say flat out, get the vaccine. I favor getting vaccinated. I favor getting boosted. But I also favor holding the pharmaceutical companies to account and making sure that we never, ever get ourselves in a situation like this again, where we find ourselves being, reliant on for-profit corporations to deal with a massive public health crisis.
Absolutely. You had Newsweek actually came and took a look, did the piece on you. I thought it was interesting how they put quotes around everything.
Yeah.
Nichols has claimed, they said claimed, you've claimed, as in Nichols has pointed out, that Trump's approach to pandemic, here's the exact quote, was a deliberate quote. They put deliberate dereliction of duty, that it was severely misguided and driven by lies, and that it costs not just a few lives but hundreds of thousands. It's really very interesting the way they quoted you.
I appreciate the attention, and the attention to this discussion, because it's rare in major media, and I know this is, when I was writing this book, I knew this was a challenge here. If I simply said Trump's a bad guy, right? Well, you could go on plenty of media and do that. But if you say that Trump is a manifestation of a bad system, right, of a bad structure, and that he was the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time, but that he didn't put himself there, that he got there because we have a political system in our country that rewards impunity, right? That allows for narcissistic, self-serving, deeply troubled people to get into positions of power. And then we get hit with a pandemic, and what do? They act as narcissistic, self-serving, deeply troubled people and do horrible things. So we got to ask the deeper questions about, what's wrong with our system. And frankly, the way to get to those deeper questions is by holding people to account.
You answered my question a bit ago, but I'm going to pose it again in case you want to go deeper. You said, again, Trump had a deliberate dereliction of duty. How do we know he wasn't just an idiot?
That's always a great question. Look, that's letting folks off too easily, right? Because if he was just an idiot, right, I can guarantee you Trump would still be president of the United States. That's a painful reality. If Donald Trump had said, boy, I know nothing about this. I don't have a clue about public health, and I don't have a clue about how to deal with a pandemic. And if he had turned to the scientists, who, by the way, were ready to help him, Dr. Fauci was, standing there, said, I'll step up, I'll help. There were a lot of other scientists. In fact, people even disagreed with Fauci on some issues. You could have a really broad set of good information, right? Fundamentally useful information. And you could have sorted through it and dealt with it. And frankly, if Trump had led the country through the pandemic as ably as prime ministers and chancellors in Germany and New Zealand and places around, mostly women, had done, I think there's a very good chance he would have been reelected.
Your book does paint a picture. Well, so there's a silver lining, is what you're telling me. But
if I can just finish that one core thought, though, that I think that if Trump had just acknowledged that he didn't know stuff, if he had been a fool, that would have been fine. He may have made mistakes, but it would have been ultimately you err toward trying to deal with this thing. No, Donald Trump is a self-absorbed, deep mess of a human being who looked at the pandemic and said, wow, this is going to be a problem for my reelection. And so as he acknowledged to Bob Woodward, he lied about it. He literally lied at a point when people's lives were at stake. And that's not idiocy. That's deep, fundamental self-service and political machinations at a time when we needed someone to work in the public interest.
We put up a quote a moment ago from your piece that was out in The Nation recently that was about the book. And the quote is, let's throw that back up there. There you go. When a president presides over mass death and mass unemployment and remains politically viable enough to claim the nomination of a major party and to mount a re-election bid, even vaguely credible numbers, the rot in the system runs so deep that those who maintain it cannot be rehabilitated. Talk about what you meant when you said this quote.
Yeah, look, I think that this is the heart of the matter. We had a pandemic, and it's ongoing. It continues to be a challenge for us as a country. But we had this incredibly jarring moment in 2020 into early 2021, mass deaths. Trucks pulled up outside hospitals for the bodies. I mean, it was a horrifying moment, and we asked poor and working class people to sacrifice everything, even their lives, as essential workers. I mean, we've been through so much, and yet now, as there are some talk about normalcy, right? Kind of how we might move back to a more functional place. There's the danger that we forget about who did wrong, who screwed up. That's why I wrote the book. And the reason to do it isn't just to punish these people. It's not to say, oh, you did something bad, so we're going to put you in jail or fine you or tax you or impeach you or do something. No, the point is to say that we look for accountability because accountability drives change. If we allow a Donald Trump or an Elaine Chao or a Ron Johnson or an Andrew Cuomo to be rehabilitated, to come back and say, well, we went through that thing and maybe I made some mistakes, but I'm ready to serve again, then we guarantee that we will have the same circumstance again. There will be another pandemic. And whether it's a Donald Trump in that position or someone else who is just as pathological as he, will end up in the same situation. So breaking the cycle is the key. And you can't rehabilitate those who led us into this crisis. Similarly, you can't fail to address the systemic problems that allow such people to get power, both in our politics and in our economy.
Do we have mechanisms to actually hold these people accountable? Working mechanisms?
Yeah, one of them is called elections.
But I said working, John.
Yeah, I know. I realized I heard every word you said, and I completely respect the cynicism and the frustration about it. But we actually should be conscious that we had an accountability moment in November of 2020. Donald Trump was voted out of office, and I will argue as on the highest mountaintop that the key reason he was voted out was because of his absolute mishandling and deliberate dereliction of duty as regards COVID. So I think there was an accountability moment there. I think you also had an accountability moment in Georgia, which gave control of the U.S. Senate to the Democrats in 2020. So that can happen. And I think we shouldn't underestimate it, but it can't be the end of it. There should be a whole host of accountability actions. There should be investigations by the Congress, House and Senate at the highest level. There's a House committee that's looking into this right now, and they've done some good work. I give them credit. But do you know anything about it? No. We know everything about January 6th, as we should, because January 6th was a huge deal. We know a lot about, a whole bunch of other things. But the inquiries into who did wrong and who screwed up around the pandemic, that has not been raised to the level it should be. So I recommend doing what happened during the Great Depression, which was that they established something called the Pecora Commission. It was a Senate-driven commission with a former mob prosecutor, a guy who literally prosecuted mobsters going after bankers. And
that seems fitting.
Yeah, I'm ready to put Zephyr Teach out, in front of a Senate committee and have her go after the pandemic.
That would be fun to watch.
And the monopolists. So that's what I'm talking about. You need that level of accountability. But also, there's a simpler level of accountability. We have not been able to pass Build Back Better, which is a modest bill, right? And one of the things that our Republican friends and some Democrats, including Joe Manchin, tell us is that we can't afford it. It'll run us into deficits. It'll cost too much. And I think, well, I know where we can find a whole bunch of money. Let's tax every billionaire back to where they were on March 20th, 2020, when the pandemic hit. Let's say you were super rich. We're not even going to take away all your money. We're not going to do, Bernie Sanders said that billionaires shouldn't exist. We're not even going to go to that radical point. We're going to go to a simple, modest point where we take you back to where you were 2 years ago.
And then what are we going to do with all that
well,
cash?
the trillions of dollars that we would get, because it is in the trillions, by the way. Well, yes. I've got a good suggestion for you.
Do it.
If we were to get $2 trillion, a couple $1 trillion out of the billionaires, and maybe let's say we might even go after some uber millionaires. Let's say we go after people who make over 100 million a year. Not that they have that in their actual holdings, but that they make that much annually. So we go after some of the big billionaires, the big millionaires. You're talking about raising enough money in the trillions of dollars that you could pay for all of Build Back Better, right?
No, these are good ideas, but the mechanisms. People feel.
Oh, I'll tell you what the mechanism is.
Yeah.
Run for office on that instead of the BS that people run for office on. There are Democratic consultants right now who will say, oh, well, we should talk a little bit about this and a little bit about that. And, ooh, people are feeling uncomfortable. Push it aside. You run for office saying, if I get in the U.S. Senate, if I get in the U.S. House, I will seek to tax the billionaires back to where they were on March 20th, because an essential worker shouldn't have had to die while a billionaire got dramatically richer. And I will also, you know what I'll do? I won't do it, but somebody else should. Let's say, let's pause and think about this. There's so much to talk about. It's an endless gold mine from a political messaging standpoint. It's like we had a situation where nurses were literally putting garbage bags on them to protect them against the virus in the early stages. And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk were thinking, I'm making so much money, I think I'm going to fly into space, right? Juxtapose these realities.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I think we can change our politics. I don't have any doubt.
All right, we're going to talk about that in our second segment. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you've teased what the second segment is going to be about. But it's interesting. We talked about the dereliction of duty. Not to come back to that point. It's very clear about Trump's dereliction of duty, but it does seem like there was a coordinated dereliction of duty that was just waiting for something like this to happen, where these people could all take advantage of their pet projects, like
absolutely
a privatization of schools. Like, none of these people that you have in your book, let me name some of the names up here, they didn't do anything to help, and they pushed their libertarian leaning ideas forward. You've got one of the chapters, how Betsy DeVos tried to leverage a pandemic to privatize public education. The next one, these are two of my favorites, Elaine Chao, let them die. She was the head of transportation, and she just was like, I'm not going to do anything. Mitch McConnell's fatal bargain, how Rand Paul got COVID-19 wrong, and wrong again. And he keeps going wrong. All of these different people, they were coordinatedly in lockstep of dereliction of duty.
Yeah, I think that's a phrase that I wouldn't mind borrowing. Lockstep dereliction of duty is pretty good.
The next book.
But thank you. But no, look, this is the reality, and again, it's what we see with impunity, right? Impunity is the concept that you don't think you're ever going to be held to account, and if there's a lack of accountability for a long period of time, then those who are in power, instead of opting to do what is beneficial for the great mass of people, because they know that if they don't, they could be held to account for it. They could be punished for it. They will say, "Oh, hey, it's an opportunity, right? This is a chance to do what I might not be able to do in another situation." And so with Betsy DeVos, you see, it happened. In all this is, by the way, not behind closed doors. It's in public. Betsy DeVos went on Tucker Carlson's show and said, well, these schools, they keep doing mask mandates and they're not sure they want to open yet because teachers might get sick and die. Well, if they're not going to do it, maybe we should just move the money over to the private schools that will open, right? So here she connected the two things directly. She literally said, we're going to use the threat of taking public money away from public schools and giving it to private schools in order to force the public schools to do what we want them to do. And that was classic.
And in those, in both that case and the case with Elaine Chao, who was, of course, the Secretary of Transportation, right? They both got enormous pushback by unions. It seems that the role of unions it was more important when these things were going on in 2020 than they've ever been before. Can you comment on that a little bit? And also, have we missed the moment, or are we still hot for, is labor still hot right now?
I think labor's still hot. In fact, we've had some real wins for unions in this moment of not enough people to fill jobs. People who are in jobs have a lot more leverage, and they've often been turning to unions to try and advance them. But if there's a hero in my book, or heroes in my book, it tends to be trade unionists and the unions themselves, because in situations where you had strong unions, they were able to push back against corporations and say, "Hey, hold it! We need to be protected. We need care here." Where there weren't unions, that's where you saw some of the worst things happen. And early on, when I was writing about the pandemic, and I covered it on a very regular basis throughout, I did a lot of interviews with the transportation unions because they were deeply concerned about what was happening to bus drivers, subway workers, and others. They were dying, and their pushback actually was very, very effective. They got protective shields in buses. They got masks, and when vaccinations came, they got them in the front of the line. They did a lot of good work there. But what they recognized was that their work was made much more difficult by someone like an Elaine Chao, because when the unions, and they all came together and asked her to do a mask mandate nationally, she refused. She refused again and again and again and again. And the same thing happened with Betsy DeVos. The teachers unions were saying, look, we've got ideas for how we can get the schools reopened, how we can get kids back into schools that'll be safe for teachers and safe for students. And instead of working with them and respecting them, DeVos and her echo chamber, you were often deeply critical of the unions. And so what I would argue is that if there's a lesson from the pandemic, it is that, sadly, until we make a lot of changes, we can't count on government to always do the right thing. And we cannot count on the corporations to do the right thing. And so you need very strong unions. And it's notable that in the chapter on Jeff Bezos, I write a lot about the effort to unionize Amazon, and making the point that that was covered in a lot of our media as just a typical union battle, right? Union wants to organize, company doesn't want it. But it was underpinned by COVID. And there were a lot of people who stepped up to try and organize the union, and who are continuing to do so, not just at Amazon, but in workplaces across this country, because they said, look, we saw the reality that if we don't have a strong union, we're not going to be protected.
Well, you have said, as we come to the close of this segment, but not the whole show, because you're staying with me for a brief moment after, you have said that accountability is so important, because without it, we will continue to allow impunity. Do you think if, as a nation, we had held George W. Bush accountable for war crimes, we would have been in this same situation we are today?
No, I think we'd be in a better situation if we had. And I do argue that in the essay that was published in The Nation, and that is based on the closing chapter of the book. Look, we have had, with presidents of the United States, repeated opportunities to hold them to account, and we passed on it. Nixon was not held to account for Watergate. He got on a plane and flew off to San Clemente. Reagan was not held to account for Iran-Contra. And Bush was not held to account for the lies that led to the war in Iraq. So we see in different areas, right? Political corruption, international scheming, a war, no accountability. And we see that similar things in the private sector as well. Again and again and again, a lack of accountability. And then we're shocked when those who come into positions of power are self-serving and do not begin to have respect for the public interest, the public good. The bottom line is a failure of accountability over time adds up to impunity. It virtually guarantees that those who are in power will not do what they should do. That doesn't always happen. You can get a good person in power. It can happen. It does. But the danger is so great that the demand for accountability has to come forward. And I can tell you this, that one of the reasons that Franklin Roosevelt was so successful as a president during the Great Depression and going into World War II was because he never, ever limited accountability. They held bankers to account. They held war profiteers to account. And they taxed corporations. They taxed excess profits. They taxed the wealthy. We talk about in this country, we used to have a 91% tax rate, right? That extended out of World War II and into the 1950s. In the boom era of the 1950s, when so much of America's expansion occurred, right? We had a 91% tax rate for the marginal tax rate for the upper income folks. The fact of the matter is that when you hold people to account politically, through impeachment and through censure and other political actions, but also economically through a tax system that really does say, no, you don't get to have excess profits. You don't get to have excess wealth. If you do, we're going to tax it and put it back into the system to serve the great mass of people. If you say that, you're going to get dramatically different and better behaviors on the part of your political leaders and your economic leaders. That's the point of the book.
John Nichols, the book is Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. I do want to thank you personally for putting this work together. Again, it did draw, it just answered a lot of questions that got missed as one tried to survive the pandemic themselves. Thank you so much for being on the program.
It's a total honor to be with you. Thanks for having me.